Thank you to the Hartman Institute for bringing me into conversation with Micah Goodman. They sent me an essay that he wrote recently, which is, I think, a précis of the book that he's working on, titled Our Technology Sickness and How to Heal It. And I just read it a couple of days ago. It's an extraordinary essay. I urge everybody to read it. I just want to share one line. Micah and I really share a deep concern. We both have the sense that things are going to hell in liberal democracies, not all equally, but certainly in the US and Israel, yes. And we share a sense, as many do, that somehow something about our recent technology is at the heart of this. And we've both been struggling to explain what it is. And so in this essay, Our Technology Sickness, I'll just read you one line and then I'll let Micah talk about it later. I just love this line. He says, because of the digital revolution, here we are. Because the digital revolution, our lives are being transformed by three grand bargains. The intellectual bargain, we have more knowledge, but less capacity to concentrate and focus. The social bargain, we are much more available, but much less attentive. And most importantly, the emotional bargain, we are much more connected, but much less empathetic. So that's about a summary of what's happened, not just with the technology, but with our humanity. That's where I think we are. And that's why I'm so looking forward to this conversation. Now, Micah also brings a grounding of our current dilemma in Jewish history and Talmudic scholarship, which also greatly appeals to me. I co-founded an organization called Heterodox Academy, which is all about viewpoint diversity. And our patron saint is John Stuart Mill in On Liberty. And as you'll see, many of Mill's insights are exactly the same insights about the intellectual virtues and the difficulty of finding truth that is embodied in the Talmudic tradition. So I'll tell you briefly sort of my story, and I'll weave it into the big story about what I think has happened to us for about maybe 10 minutes. And then I'll pass it over to Micah. He'll say a bit, and then the two of us will talk, and then we'll have time for questions from you, from the audience at the end. So I'm a social psychologist and I study morality, and I've come to believe that the best way, like when I'm teaching anything to students, the best way is to put it in a narrative. Our minds are narrative processors. And if you could just link things into the slots of a story, it becomes easy to understand. And so here's the first story. The first story is the Tower of Babel. So the descendants of Noah are spreading out over the plain of Shinar, and they decide to build themselves a city, and with the tower reaching to the heavens so that God can't flood them again. God can't scatter them across the earth again. So they start building the tower, and God is not pleased by this. Now, there are many interpretations of why, but on the face of it, it looks like he's responding to their hubris, their desire to become godlike themselves. And so then God says, he says, look, nothing that they do now will be closed from them. They'll be able to do anything. And then here's the key line. The key line is, well, just from memory, he says, let us go down and confuse their language so that they may not understand one another. That's the curse of Babel. God makes it so that everyone, imagine this magnificent tower that early humans have built. You live in this incredible city, what progress. And then all of a sudden, boom, the tower comes down, at least in many more modern renderings. The tower is knocked over and you can't even talk to the people next to you. So my argument in my recent Atlantic article, which I hope maybe can be put in the chat as well, in my recent Atlantic article is, this is the best metaphor I've ever seen for what is happening to us now in the United States in particular, that our technology has done something to fragment our ability to share common stories or to even communicate. Ironically, the more connected we are, the harder it is to actually share a common story. And that's similar to the irony in Micah's three grand bargains. So now to retell that story in modern times, we had this glorious birth or rebirth of liberal democracy in the 1990s. We were delivered from a dark period, the Cold War. In joy and glee, democracy spreads out across the earth. It seems unstoppable. And this begins just before the internet is really something known to us. Well, the internet then in the late 1990s, this is going to be the greatest boon to democracy ever, we think, all the way into the 2010s, in the early 2000s. we think, what dictator could possibly stand up against people who are connected and empowered through social media? And I want to bring you especially to the pivotal year of 2011, which begins in January of 2011, the Arab Spring, Tunisia and Egypt, dictators tumbling, brought down by people empowered by Facebook and other platforms. And this extraordinary year ends in September with Occupy Wall Street, and that spreads globally. So 2011 is the extraordinary year of techno-democratic optimism. It also happens to be the year that Google Translate becomes available to everyone in the world on all platforms and phones. So if ever there was a year when we did it, we rebuilt the tower, we overcame the curse, it's 2011. But then history repeats itself, the story continues, and from that high point, everything goes to hell. Everything crumbles after that. Now, my argument in the essay is that social media, we have to understand, social media isn't just about, hey, you look at the pictures of my kids, isn't this great? It really changed in 2009 when Facebook added the like button and Twitter added the retweet button, and the whole system gets much more about virality and algorithms maximizing for engagement. So before 2009, Facebook, Twitter, these are not so different from other platforms that let you communicate. It's good to be able to talk on the phone to your grandparents. It's good to be able to have a group chat, to have what we're doing now, Zoom. All of this is good. This is facilitating direct communication. But after 2009, the major platforms become about performance, where you put out your performance, you carefully craft it, you worry about it, you think about it, you put it out, and then you wait to see who liked it, who retweeted it, who shared it. And now we're all about performing at each other, hoping to get more likes, more popularity, more prestige than the next person. This is a fundamental change in the nature of social media. So the technology changed around 2009 to 2011 in there. That's also the period when everyone gets a phone, again, gets online, and we can especially see it in kids. So if we look at Gen Z, that is kids born 1996 or after 1996 and after, Gen Z, all of a sudden, right around 2011, 2012, the graphs of their mental illness skyrocket. It wasn't a gradual thing. There was no change in mental health of teenagers in the United States, Britain, or Canada. I have good data on those three countries. There was no change in mental health status all the way through the early 2000s, right up to 2012. And then all of a sudden, the rate of self-harm, hospitalizations for self-harm, rate of suicide, depression, anxiety, all of these things go up 50 to 150%. Huge increases right around 2012. So they were the canaries in the coal mine. And I can show in some documents. I think I have a link I sent in. I put all my documentation. I show my work on a webpage, jonathanhaidt.com/social media. So the teenagers go crazy first. We lose them first, and they're still lost. The rates of depression, anxiety, the fragility, even those that aren't clinically depressed, are fragile in experience. They've been denied a normal childhood because they spent the entire time, almost all experience comes through the phone. They don't have normal social experience anymore. That ended around 2012. So they were the canaries in the coal mine. And then I was on campus. I'm a professor at NYU. In 2014, 2015, we started to see campus culture change. A small number of students started attacking others. We all became afraid of saying anything. The phrase walking on eggshells became very common by 2015. None of this was there in 2012, but by 2015, campus culture is changing. If you say anything that's not orthodox, if you say anything, especially on matters of race, gender, transgender, immigration, all sorts of hot button topics, you could be publicly shamed and you might even get fired. And this was, again, all new. This wasn't there in before 2012. So things began to go insane. My friend Greg Lukianoff and I wrote an article. We thought that this was actually just something happening on campus originally. But by 2018, as Gen Z begins to graduate from college, now they take these norms into journalism, into the arts, into almost every place that they go to work. And we start seeing these moral political conflicts, the quick use of social media to destroy people. That spreads very widely after about 2018, 2019. And we call that cancel culture. And so that spread very widely. It's not everywhere, but it is in the places that hire from progressive, left-leaning, elite American colleges. It's very common there. So now there's plenty to be said about the fault. In my article, I talk about how the far right goes insane, and you see this in the Republican Party, which has lost all touch with the conservative tradition. It is not conservative. It's radical. It's power hungry. It violates the rules. So I say the Republican Party has become the insane party, not the Democrats. However, on the left, it's the cultural left. It's left-leaning institutions in which there's a political and moral homogeneity. That's what leads to what I call structural stupidity. If you have moral homogeneity, then dissent gets prosecuted, punished. You get assassinated, as it were, socially by social media. So the cultural left has become structurally stupid. The Republican Party has gotten structurally stupid. So that's my analysis of what's happened in the United States. And I know from our pre-call yesterday from Micah that the situation is different, similar, but very different in Israel. So he'll talk about that in a moment. I just want to close my remarks by saying, keep your eye on this key idea of structural stupidity. Anytime you are part of a group or you know of a group, let's say the editors at the New York Times or the professors in a faculty meeting, whatever it is, if there's a group in which someone is afraid to say, wait a second, I think that's wrong, or wait a second, there's evidence against this view. If someone's afraid to say that, then you lose dissent, stupid ideas become elevated and people bow down to them out of fear or out of reluctance to criticize them, and the group becomes structurally stupid. When our institutions become structurally stupid, our society collapses. We cannot have a liberal democracy without strong institutions. You can have a dictatorship as long as there's a secret police force and fear. You can have a stable country out of fear, but you can't have a liberal democracy without epistemic institutions that help you find truth, democratic institutions that help you channel the views and the will of the people indirectly into legislation. So liberal democracy is very, very hard. We thought that social media was going to make it easier. We were totally wrong. In fact, social media created the conditions that, in a sense, knocked over the Tower of Babel. I founded this group, Heterodox Academy. I hope that link will be put in, to bring viewpoint diversity and open disagreement and discourse, civil disagreement back into universities. We put out an edition of John Stuart Mill's All Minus One, a beautifully illustrated edition just of chapter 2, reduced by 50%, very easy to read. So I hope people will read that. I'll just read one John Stuart Mill quote. Let me see if I have a bunch here. I'll just read one quote from John Stuart Mill and then I will pass it over. Let's see. Mill said, "The only way in which a human being can make some approach to knowing the whole of a subject is by hearing what can be said about it by persons of every variety of opinion and studying all modes in which it can be looked at by every character of mind. No wise man ever acquired his wisdom in any mode but this." And I think this and many other insights from John Stuart Mill provide a nice transition for me to now hand it over to Micah to pick up the story and tell it from his version and the Israeli perspective.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. This is, I just want to say I'm a very big fan of Jonathan's work, and in a very deep sense, a lot of my thinking about this issue are inspired by Jonathan. I'm your student in many levels.
Thank you.
And the idea of the Tower of the Migdal Babel, the Tower of how do you say it in English? Babel.
Babel. In America, Babel. In Britain, Babel.
Okay, so I think in the Bible, it's Bavel. Okay, in Hebrew. So
Bavel. Okay.
That the moment that we were all connected, that's the moment of radical separation. That paradox he developed so powerfully. This is a great example of what Friedrich Hayek calls the law of unintended consequences. Now, I'm pretty sure that the funders, the investors, the entrepreneurs of Silicon Valley that developed these, they thought their intentions was the first part of the Tower of Babel. They're going to connect the world together. And then the surprising, shocking turn of events, the law of unintended consequences kicks in, and instead of being radically connected, we're radically separated. And but it shouldn't surprise us when there's such a dramatic technological revolution that there are unintended consequences, because the magnitude of this moment in history is not like the invention of radio or TV. It's not a new, neat medium entering our lives. The magnitude is the agricultural revolution, the industrial revolution. That's the moment we're living in. Now imagine we'd go back in time, Jonathan, and you'd interview and you'd ask the investors, the entrepreneurs of the Industrial Revolution in London, and they're figuring out the whole idea of the engine. And they have these great ideas of what all the good it will bring to the world. They had no idea that a little bit more than 200 years later, we'll be noticing global warming and climate change. Because what is climate change? It's the unintended consequences of the Industrial Revolution. What is political polarization? It's the unintended consequences of the digital revolution. So we have a technological revolution, and then we see the unintended consequences. I think the only difference is, Jonathan, is that everything is so faster. Also, we recognize the unintended consequences a lot quicker. It didn't take us 250 years to see global warming. Like it took 250 years to see global warming after the Industrial Revolution. It took us 10 years to realize we're all going crazy after the digital revolution. And I think we're speaking about two different unintended consequences. I'm just diving into what you're saying and fleshing from what you're saying and fleshing it out. There is a emotional crisis and there is a political crisis. And these are two very, very important, like you said, the emotional crisis, anxiety, depression, suicide rates are going up, and political polarization is our politics is becoming so polarized that we are paralyzed. Jonathan, I'd like to not go into the emotional part, but to the political part and try to explain how Israel's Prime Minister Bennett said in his first speech in the UN that this was back in after Sukkot, I think it was October, he gave a speech in the UN as Israel's new prime minister. He says the world is suffering not from one, but by two pandemics. One is biological, the second is political. So it was deep in COVID, there was a biological pandemic, and there is a political pandemic, which is political polarization. But Israel's polarization is very weird. I want to use this opportunity, Jonathan, to share with, I'm pretty sure most of the crowd here is North American, to share what's unique about Israel. So there's a global pandemic called political polarization. Israel is a part of the world, so we're also extremely polarized because we're all we're all part of the same digital revolution and are suffering from the same unintended consequences. But I think usually the way polarization works is that people just hate each other more for one reason: because of the other side's political opinion. Like if you hate someone because of the color of their skin, that's racism. If you hate someone because he supports Bibi, because they're a leftist, that's polarization. It's when the reason for hate becomes politics. And in a polarized world, that brand of hate is on steroids. And we, scientists can measure, Putnam has this way, we measure polarization, or that brand of hate. But what's interesting is almost always the emotional distance between right and left. I read that today in the 1960s, 4% of Americans said they'd have a problem if their son or daughter marries someone from the other side of the aisle. Let's say if you're Republican, so you have 4% said it'll be a problem for them if their son or daughter marries a Democrat. And now it's over 50%. That's like your new mixed marriage. There's like, if you have a different political view, like they're a different brand of people. We don't marry them. Now, so that's how it's called. That's like there's this emotional distance, but there's also an ideological distance. Like what left-wingers think about issues like policy issues, like immigration, national security, other abortion, what the right and leftists feel about issues is also becoming right-wingers are becoming more right, left-wingers becoming more left, and the distance is growing. So almost always, the emotional gap comes in the same package with the growth of the ideological gap, which takes me to the paradox of Israel. And I'll present this and then hand this over back to you, Jonathan. In Israel, we have the following. Israelis never agreed with each other more than they agree with each other today. From the point of view of ideology and policy, Israelis were never more distant than they are today. In the past 74 years, we never had this phenomenon where at least 70% of Israelis agree on at least 70% of the issues. The leaders of this government say it's actually 80-80. 80% of Israelis agree on 80% of the issues. And that itself is very interesting because in our conversation yesterday, Jonathan, you said, hey, but there's the whole West Bank Palestinian issue. Aren't you guys hating each other because of that and disagreeing? Well, here's the thing. Reality made Israelis very moderate on this issue. Like back in the 80s and in the 90s, we had a right-wing camp that was called Shlemut Haaretz, the fullness of the land, the completeness of the land. We shouldn't give up 1 inch of the sacred land of Israel. And the left was speaking about this utopia of peace, of a new Middle East where all nation states will live together in peace and harmony. So the left spoke about the utopia of peace, and the right, the utopia of the land. And here's what happens. In 1994, Israel leaves 40% of the West Bank, part of the Oslo Accords. And guess what? The right was against it. It's a catastrophe. Today, the majority of the right accept Oslo, and you will find some right-wingers, but they're a minority. Majority of right-wingers do not want to return to those 40%, control them, and settle them. You know what that means? That de facto, the right gave up the dream of the completeness of the land. At the same time, because of the results of the Second Intifada, I won't go into it now, majority of left-wingers in Israel don't believe that peace is possible. So when the left in Israel is more pragmatic and less utopian, and the right is becoming more pragmatic and less utopian, on these issues, they were never closer than they ever were before. So you ask, oh, that's great. We're finally unified. We finally agree. Here's a paradox. Right-wingers hate left-wingers with a passion, and left-wingers hate right-wingers with a passion. That's the paradox in Israel. We're in America, where you are emotionally distant, you're also ideologically distant. In Israel, ideologically, we're closer than ever been before, but emotionally, we hate each other, just like we've always hated each other before. And I think this has this paradox, or the fact that we couldn't leverage the unity of ideas into unity in society, has everything to do with the disruption of the unintended consequences of the digital revolution.
Wow, that is quite a story and quite astonishing to hear you say that something about how reality or brushes with reality made Israelis more moderate or brought them together. I wish that could happen in the United States. I don't know if that could happen here anymore. But just tell me, so in the United States, we have these nice graphs, we have these horrible graphs about how the degree to which we hate each other has been rising steadily since around 2000 or since the late 1990s, with an increase in the late 2010s. So the cross-party, and it's been going up and then up a little faster. From what you're telling me, in terms of issues, Israelis are now less polarized, but in terms of emotion or dislike of each other, has it been that steady thing? Has it been leveling off? Is there a sense that things are getting worse and worse, faster and faster, or not?
No, in Israel, it's different. In Israel, we were always extreme. We always hated each other in Israel. This is not new. Ever since the invention, ever since the beginning of Zionism, the revisionists and the socialists, they were blaming each other for everything that's bad. And just right in 1995, the level of polarization in Israel was so high that our Prime Minister Rabin was assassinated as a result of a very, very poisonous atmosphere. So I think in Israel, what we find is that we were always very polarized. So in Israel, I think in America, you're facing a crisis. In Israel, we're missing an opportunity. Brother, I don't know what's more tragic. An opportunity presents itself. Ideologically, we started agreeing, but we can't transform the ideological agreement into unity. And I think that is the result. Social media is not making us polarized. It's blocking our ability not to be polarized in a time where we agree more than we've ever agreed before.
Yeah. Okay. So now that we both kind of diagnosed the sickness of our two countries, and in both cases it predates the arrival of social media, but social media has made it harder to solve these problems. So let's bring in what I thought was especially fascinating and unique about your essay, was bringing in Talmudic scholarship, and especially, let me see if I have that line. There's a line about how our conceptions are larger than our reality. What was that line? What is?
Okay, so I'll try to explain the Talmud is an incredible text because it's a sacred text. It's a text with authority. It's our canon. It is a Jewish canon. By the way, Jonathan, the Bible is not a Jewish text. I mean, it was written by Jews, but it's a universal text. It's not uniquely Jewish. The Talmud is what forms Jewish culture. The Talmud, more than any other text, is what forms Jewish culture. Throughout the centuries, when Jews got together to study their tradition, they didn't study the Bible. They studied the Talmud. You know, evangelical preachers can know like every chapter and verse on the Bible. Jews don't have that. We know every daf in the Talmud. That this text that we master is the Talmud. Now, here's what's interesting about the Talmud. The Talmud is our canon, and what the Talmud is, it's an ongoing argument. Mm-hmm. Judaism and the Jews are the only people that canonized an argument. So Moshe Halbertal, I think he teaches in your university, has a great insight into the canonization and into the Talmud. He says, well, the Romans also have a canon, right? Anyone that's interested in law knows, like the Roman. Now, but the Romans did it the right way. They canonized the law. The Jews canonized the argument about the law. They can only assume that in Rome, some intellectuals had arguments about the law. When they canonized it, they erased the arguments and canonized the conclusion. The Talmud erased the conclusion and canonized the argument. Now, what does that mean? This doesn't mean, I think when it comes to Jewish tradition has a double expectation from us, from the followers, the sons and daughters of this tradition. One, to obey the law. Like there's a law, try to obey it. The second is to study Talmud. What does that mean? The law, let's say there's agreement in the Talmud between the house of Shammai and the house of Hillel. Okay, everyone presents their idea and the argument and debate it. So the law is only according to one side. In this case, the house of Hillel, not the house of Shammai. So let's put these two ideas together. We follow the law and we study Talmud. You put it together, what comes out is that we're obligated to study ideas we don't live by, which means our intellectual life is richer than our practical life. Let me try to create the analogy. Imagine I'm a real progressive, liberal, Bernie Sanders, whatever, like I'm actively, politically active. Practically, I'm very to the left. But I listen to podcasts by right-wingers and read books by Republicans and go to lectures by conservative speakers. I'm making sure that my intellectual life is broader than my practical life, that my curiosity breaks the boundaries of my opinions. That, Jonathan, is the ethos of the Talmud. You learn both sides and you live only according to one side. I think what social media is doing to us is it's shrinking our mind to the size of our opinions. Left-wingers listen to podcasts by left-wingers, right? Right-wingers like to listen to read posts that are mocking left-wingers. So our intellectual life is the size of our opinions. That, Jonathan, is an anti-Talmudic world.
That's right, an anti-Talmudic world. That is the world we're living in. And it's quite amazing that this religious text offers the solution to the hyper-religiousization of our political life. In my Atlantic essay, I had this amazing quote from Martin Gurri, a former CIA analyst who wrote this incredible book, The Revolt of the Public. He talks about how in the 20th century, the age of mass media, mass media was like a mirror reflecting back to us what we were. And that was distorted in some ways, but we all looked into this mirror and then we saw a reflection of society. He says, the digital revolution has shattered that mirror, and now the public inhabits those broken pieces of glass. Yep. So the public isn't one thing. It's highly fragmented and it's basically mutually hostile. It's mostly people yelling at each other and living in bubbles of one sort or another. But what you've just described is a way of living where you don't live in just one bubble or another. You actually acquaint yourself with the arguments from other bubbles. And then an amazing thing happens, which is you find out actually they've got some perspectives. They actually are right about certain things, or they offer a critique of my bubble that actually that'll make us better. So now here I want to bring in, I also want to put in where I started especially getting excited about the importance of Talmudic scholarship for our modern craziness was last Yom Kippur, my rabbi, I go to Central Synagogue in New York City, and my rabbi, Angela Buchdahl, wrote this incredible sermon. Let me see if I can put this in the chat myself. Well, yeah, I'll just put it here. She wrote this incredible sermon on the practice of having a hebruta, a study partner that you push ideas off of. And it was so good. I asked her if I could write a blog post at Heterodox Academy and just send people to it and quote it. I'll just give one quote from her article. She says, "Let's remember what our tradition teaches, not what to believe, but how we get to beliefs worth holding. Questioning is sacred, dissent is productive. If you start to debate, you may discover something that transcends the binary. You may discover a third opinion, and it will inevitably be wiser than either of the first two. So this, I think, is really part of the answer. I mean, what do we do about this craziness that's engulfed us? In my article, I focus on structural solutions, changes to social media, legislative approaches to modifying our electoral institutions, our democratic institutions, changes to childhood, big things we need to do that are structural changes. But I wish now that I had written in my Atlantic article about what we can all do as individuals. I didn't even touch that. And I think it's cultivating these intellectual virtues of the sort that Judaism and that Talmudic scholarship cultivates. It trains young people to, through daily practice in acquaint yourself with the ideas of the other. They're not a threat to you. They're actually a benefit to you. And the fact that we honor them, we honor good debate partners, we honor them in these texts is beautiful and brilliant. And I'll just share a tidbit I learned. I was reading some art, there's all these articles on, how Jews are represented in various fields. I read something like 40% of the faculty, if you look at the top law schools, I don't know, top 20, I don't know what it was. If you look at the top law schools in the United States, something like 40% of the faculty are Jewish. There's something about the Jewish tradition that basically prepared minds for being legal scholars. And that, while I don't want to necessarily live in a world full of lawyers and legal scholars, but at least this idea of people whose worlds, whose intellectual worlds are larger than their practice and their commitments. That is not just beautiful, I think that is necessary for life in a modern, fragmented, liberal democracy.
So we're speaking about the power of culture to heal our society. And by the way, all your solutions and your Atlantic piece with this regulation it's all very important. But we're tapping it now, and we should implement that and more. But and we should just start experimenting in solutions and see what works and what doesn't work, and figure this out. And I might want to say something about that later on, about like how would these experiments look like. But I think the power of culture is also because it cultivates. Every culture cultivates an admiration for a type of a person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I have and the type of person that we admire, just by admiring that kind of a person, it changes us. Like if you admire an athlete, the chances are you'll be, you might be finding yourself jogging at night, right? If a culture that admires intellectuals, I'm pretty sure there's higher rates of people that read in the evening and not watch Netflix, right? A culture that admires people that are famous just because they're famous, well, probably a narcissistic culture, right? We are what we admire. Now, here's the question. Going back to the Talmud, who does the Talmud admire? Or when the Talmud, what does it do to its readers? It cultivates admiration for a certain type of a person. And by admiring that person, we change. So who does the Talmud admire? So it's very interesting. It admires the people that change their minds. I want to share something. I mentioned before the house of Hillel and the house of Shammai. These are two schools of thoughts, and they always were at it, they were arguing. Now, according to the Talmud, halacha, the law, is according to Bet Hillel, the house of Hillel, and not the house of Shammai. Now, why? There's two explanations of the Talmud. There's actually two different Talmudic texts. There's the Babylonian Talmud, Jonathan Babel, right? The Babylonian Talmud, yes. And then there's the Jerusalemite Talmud. These separate texts, and they deal with similar issues. So according to the Babylonian Talmud, why is the law according to Beit Hillel, not Beit Shammai? And here's why. Because in the school of thought of Beit Shammai, they studied only the opinions of Beit Shammai. In the school of thought of Beit Hillel, they studied also Beit Shammai and also Beit Hillel. That is why halacha is according to them, because they were better listeners. Now, in the Jerusalemite Talmud, they take it one step forward. There's a statement there that says, I'll say this in Hebrew and then I'll translate it, about Beit Hillel, shehayu ro'im divrei Beit Shammai v'chozrim behem. Halacha, the law, is according to Beit Hillel because they would listen to the opinions of Beit Shammai, change their minds in the middle of an argument, and adopt the worldview of Beit Shammai and practice the opinion of Beit Shammai. So the law is according to the people that have an opinion that are not trapped in their own opinion. So
no, wait, just hold on a second. Are you saying they adopt the worldview, or are you saying they listen and they acknowledge certain features? Are you saying they try it on wholesale to see it, or are you saying they change because of it?
So there's many arguments between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai in the Talmud. Almost all these Beit Hillel tried to persuade Beit Shammai, and they stuck to their opinions. But it happened more than several times that in the middle of the argument, Beit Hillel neglected their own opinions and adopted Beit Shammai's opinions. I think my best description of listening, to listen to someone, is to risk your own opinion. If you're not putting your own worldview at risk, you're just nodding your head, you're faking it, you're not really listening.
Yeah.
And Beit Hillel, so the Talmud is cultivated, like I know in Israel, when a politician, for example, changes his mind, he loses all his authority. That's what's happening to our Prime Minister Bennett, by the way.
Yeah.
The Talmud is the opposite. Because Beit Hillel changed their mind sometimes, they didn't lose their authority. That's why they have authority. That's why the law is according to them. Now, this is another idea that me and you that we discovered that we share, is the belief that many very modern and contemporary problems have very ancient solutions and answers. And here we have a world, I think the way I was listening to your opening remarks, that is what is a polarized world? It's a world where conversations collapsed. And a polarized
one side or the other. Yeah.
And listening collapsed. And is it interesting, Jonathan, that maybe the number one problem in our world today is only competing with global warming, political polarization as a major problem the world has today. And here we have a tradition, and in polarization is, conversations collapse. We have here a tradition that canonizes a conversation, that our heroes are the people that study the conversation, and we admire the people that don't stick to their opinions, but they're open-minded enough to every now and then change their own opinions. This is where we have a very modern problem, and we see an ancient tradition that seems to try to cultivate the attitudes, the skills to deal with a very contemporary problem.
Yeah. Okay, so Micah, do you see any way that this culture, this intellectual culture, this culture of study and practice and debate could spread beyond the confines of academic Judaism or religious Judaism? What I mean is, here I am, so I'm in a secular culture, which is very parallel. The university is very much parallel to the tradition of Jewish scholarship. There are traditions of Muslim scholarship and Buddhist scholarship. But this is all happening with a kind of an increasingly intensified war going on around us. It's very hard when people are in a mindset of war or battle. It's very hard to say, no, instead of that, let's get into a mindset of discovery or of play or of love or any other mindset. And of course, if you have a 3,000-year tradition to base this on, and you have people dimly remembering things from their childhood, you could encourage people to think in this different way about the benefits of viewpoint diversity. But do you think it's possible, even in Israel? Would you say that this way of thinking spreads throughout secular Jewish society? Does it touch Israeli Arab society?
Yes, so it's a very powerful question. I feel that in Israel, there is a growing, the idea of the Talmud is becoming very attractive. It's becoming attractive, and being Talmudic now is becoming a metaphor. It's not studying Talmud, it's becoming the Talmud. It's adopting radical listening to someone and putting your own views at risk. Now, can that become an ethos? Can we admire those kind of people and then imitate them? That's a very big question. I think maybe a way to put it is the following. If we have the Industrial Revolution has the unintended consequences, and the digital revolution has its unintended consequences. The unintended consequences, the Industrial Revolution is global warming. And a few decades ago, the green movement began and say, what is the green movement about? It's about, the way to think about it is about protecting planet Earth from the unintended consequences of the Industrial Revolution. So Jonathan, maybe we need to form the parallel of the green movement. By protecting planet Earth from the Industrial Revolution, protecting our democracies from the digital revolution. How will that look like?
Love it.
How will that awareness look like? And by the way, and I think when the green movement realizes that there's ancient cultures that can inspire us. Cultures are connected to the land, connected to Earth. The East comes back. So when it comes to what kind of culture can inspire us, we try to develop the equivalent, the parallel of the green movement, not protecting Earth from the Industrial Revolution, protecting the democracy from the digital revolution. How does that look like? So as we shared, and so I think there's two ancient traditions that could be at service. Buddhism and Judaism, I'll try to explain why, are what's under attack, what's under digital attack is two human qualities. Our ability to spend quality time with ourselves, just to look out the window and be a dude, just to be there, just to be with yourself, spend quality time with yourself. So what's attacked is silence. And what's also attacked is conversation, right? Our ability to be playful, to have curiosity, to be there with someone, to have cognitive empathy for each other. So our ability to be silent and our ability to be in conversation are under attack. Now, I don't think Judaism has much to say about silence. I think the best practices of silence I find in Buddhism. But Judaism is a religion that developed the art of conversation. So in a world where silence is under attack and conversation is under attack, we need to empower both. We need ancient traditions to do that. Us Jews, we're not good with the silence part, but we don't have monopoly over everything that's good. Yeah. There's other traditions that could do that, like Buddhism, to protect our silence. Yeah. I highly, highly recommend mindfulness meditation and all that.
Wow.
Now, this is conversation. I think we should all go Talmudic, and that's how we should start building the equivalent.
I love it. No, Micah, this is a far better answer than I ever could have hoped for. It was kind of like an impossible question to answer, but you gave us an answer. And I can see that we need to come up with a really good name. If any marketers or branders on the call, I was thinking the millenarian movement because of John Stuart Mill, or it's going to play on Talmud or something. But basically, yes, these traditions of Jews on conversation, on productive conversation, and Buddhists on productive silence.
Yes.
And it's interesting how many, if you look at American Jews, if you go to a bookstore, you look at the Buddhism section, so many of them are actually Jewish people who, but yes, those two movements, I think, do point the way forward. This is beautiful. Okay, questions from the audience?
Okay, great. So the first one, first of all, thank you, Jonathan and Micah. Amazing work. I wish we had all afternoon or evening in your case. First question is about, I'm gonna think of framing them as counterexamples. So Ariel Meiri asked about in Israeli society or even across the world, ultra-Orthodox Jews love to study the Talmud, but create a very insular world. And I don't know if there's a good American example or not, Jonathan, but I was thinking of college students who study so much liberal text, all these viewpoints, but are creating, a fairly narrow, strict social world with cancel culture. So can you speak to whether these are counterexamples to the thesis, or do they help teach us something about what it means to study having these multiple opinions to get out of this polarization?
Yeah. So I think that is a great example to talk about. I know very little about ultra-Orthodox Jews. I'm Jewish in New York, which means there are many, tens of thousands of ultra-Orthodox Jews near me. I never meet them. I don't know any of them. So it feels like a totally separate tradition. I'm a very assimilated Ashkenazi Jew. But I think the key thing to keep your mind on is fundamentalism. So every religion has people, and there's some heritable personality traits here, but every religion has parts of it that are fundamentalist. A fundamentalist is one who insists, this is the right answer, and gets angry or aggressive at someone who questions it. We do see that on campus now. There wasn't much of it before 2012, but now there's a lot more of it. It's in certain departments, especially the studies departments, that more activist departments. So it's not the liberal tradition. Liberal meaning more, like the liberal arts, the liberal tradition. They do study not such a narrow range, and they do welcome critique. but there are more fundamentalist traditions within the academy that have gotten a lot more influential since around 2015 or so, I would say. Micah, what would you say about ultra-Orthodox?
Well, first, I just want to say something about Israelis. The kind of problems you have in the US where young people, there's views they don't want to hear, they find just listening to something is threatening to them. We don't have those problems in Israel. I'm really hoping, Israel imports a lot from the US. I hope we're not going to import that from the US. By the way, partially because Americans, when they're 18, they go to college. And as you write so beautifully in The Coddling of the American Mind, in college, you learn how to become sensitive.
Yeah.
In Israel, you go to the military. You know what you learn in the military? How to become less sensitive. Yeah. So I work a lot with Israelis post-military, and they're very, very curious. And when they hear something that's very challenging, they say, "Bring it on." We have many problems. We don't have that problem of the coddling of the. We don't have coddling of the Israeli mind. We don't have that problem. But now regarding the, I'm not saying we won't have that problem. I hope that that's something that hopefully by then we'll have the real new Talmudic green movement protecting us.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the ultra-Orthodox is very interesting. How can you learn Talmud and not become Talmudic? It's interesting. Now, I don't want to blame all the ultra-Orthodox community. They're my brothers and sisters, and I love them. I appreciate them. There's a lot to learn from them. But still, it seems like there is a contradiction between studying Talmud and not living Talmudically. And that is something that is, and that is something that I know many Haredi friends of mine are reflecting on that. And there's historic reasons for that. I don't want to go into the history of the ultra-Orthodox community, but the ultra-Orthodox community in Israel and in the US is a community that has very serious anxiety from the world for outside ideas. And by the way, I think they have serious reasons to have anxiety and try to shut yourself down. They have serious reasons, but there's also a serious price to be paid, and the price is a paradox where you're studying Talmud and not living Talmudically.
Okay, great. So the next one, first of all, the questions are flowing in, so we're not going to get to all of them. But the next one is about, because both of you really focus in your writing about trying to diagnose, analyze, understand what's causing the social things that we're all experiencing. The question is, do you see the technology aspect of your argument as enabling the human behavior that would otherwise happen, or actually causing? Is it contributing to it, or is it causing it? How would you distinguish between those two?
Well, I would say I always start with human nature. There is a human nature. We evolved for life in small groups, 50 to 150 people with animistic religion, worshiping rocks and trees and objects and moving in circles around them to rhythmic music. And that's the normal default human pattern. And we're very good at conflict with other groups. We're also very good at peacemaking with other groups. So we have equipment to do all of this stuff. And then you put us in different situations and we adapt. And some things will bring out more of our cooperative nature, like rule of law and ability to trust institutions. We become more peaceful. Some things will bring out more of our warlike nature. If there's uncertainty and shortage and danger, we'll cling to our group and fight others. So certainly these problems they occur throughout the history of humanity. But I think that the incredible optimism that developed in the 1990s and early 2000s, when crime rates were going down, when prosperity was going up, when it looked like it was the end of the end of history is a liberal democracy. That was a real time. The parameter changes brought out the better angels of our nature, as Steve Pinker said. And so my argument, at least, is that it's these changes in social media around 2009 to 2011. Those changes encourage us to all fight with each other in the comment section and everything. Small parameter changes that change the nature of our relationships can make us afraid of each other, can make us much more conflict prone and performance prone rather than authentically relating to each other. So I would say that these technological changes change the profile of the human abilities that get hyper amplified by dozens of times. And in a sense, they've created people who are very different than people were even 20 or 30 years ago.
Yes. I'm here, again, I agree with Jonathan. I want to use a different analogy here. There was, sometime in the 20th century, we had the fast food revolution. and it was great. People were celebrating it because it's just great. First of all, it's very tasty. And there's nothing like, French fries from McDonald's or whatever. And it's cheap and it's fast. That's those are the top three. You save money, time, and it's great. And then suddenly 10 years later, there is a crisis, a health crisis in the US. Diabetes, obesity. What happened? Well, what happened was is people eating junk food. That's what happened. Fast food that's what's happened. So industry changes and people's bodies changes because their diet changed. We're living now in equivalent moments. This is not the moment of fast food. It's the moment of fast information. And 10 years after fast food, you have diabetes and obesity. 10 years after fast information, you have political polarization and emotional crisis. Because fast information is junk information. And we're eating a lot of junk information, and our information diets changed. And by the way, it's very similar. Just like, junk food taps into people's weaknesses and we just love it and we're addicted to it. So junk information is the same. You get a quick emotion and we're addicted to and we don't have to invest a lot of time and energy to consume that information that gives us a quick hit, and we want more of it. So, and what was the best answer to fast food? So we have slow food, the slow food movement, for example, or this whole idea, it's a little bit hippie, but I just want to know, so you grow your own food and you cut it and you eat it slowly, slowing it down. Jonathan, you know what Talmud is? It's the slow information movement. And living Talmudically is consuming information slowly, enjoying it bite after bite, working hard for it. That's also we have to start thinking, how do we slow down the way we consume information? Because the world of fast information and junk information is going to do to our minds and democracies what fast food and junk food is doing to our physical health.
Wow, Micah, I think you are the only person I've ever met who's better with analogies than I am. These are great. I am loving these.
We'll have to see how you guys can share analogies with each other in the future.
Oh, we're forming the movement. Jonathan, we're forming the movement. In Israel and the US, the green movement.
This will probably be our last question. By the way, that question I just asked was from Ezra Miller. This one is from Suzanne Singer. It's about the connection between the emotional and the political difference of the polarized sides. She's interested in this question of why in Israel, if we still hate each other but we agree on policy, where in the U.S. we both have the policy separation and we hate on each other. How do the two of you see the connection between those two things? Is there anything we can learn about the difference of the social manifestation of the polarization in American and Israeli society that might help us chip apart at it?
Well, my first thought is that the difference is that the US is a gigantic, gigantic country where there's just so much stuff. And Israel is a much physically smaller, population smaller, linguistically smaller. All the people who speak Hebrew are all in Israel. The English-speaking world is gigantic. So it's not really possible for reality to constrain us to all see anything. There's really nothing that we can all know together anymore. Other than some Hollywood trivia, stupid stuff. And the other thing is reality doesn't have nearly as strong a grip on us here as it does in Israel, I think. You really face existential threats in a way that just hasn't occurred to us in centuries. So I think there's some differences. We have just many more degrees of freedom to believe weird stuff and to never be disciplined by reality.
Yes. Let me agree with you again. Americans, the amount of conspiracy theories that Americans believe in we don't have that in Israel. We have conspiracy theories, but reality itself, the stakes are so high. And reality itself is also so interesting and dramatic. We kind of don't need to create conspiracy theories. Reality is dramatic enough.
That was a conspiracy theory against the Jews. Yes.
That's right. Reality is, yeah. And like I said, like reality itself kicked in and made the left less ideological, and kicked in and made the right less ideological. I was speaking about this with some prominent Israelis lately, and I said right-wingers became less right-wingers opinion-wise, and left-wingers left-wing, not because they listen to each other, but because they both listen to reality. But I just want, I know when it comes to Israel, I just want to notice that in Israel we have what President Biden called, by the way, a grand experiment in politics, where you have in a very polarized world a very diverse government. Where we have Israel's government today would be, Jonathan, like imagine Elizabeth Warren and Ted Cruz. And they can't vote with each other or talk with each other, sitting in the same government and solving real problems together. We have a diverse government. It's a grand experiment in politics. Now, if this experiment fails, it will create a bad narrative, because it'll be, this is proof.
Yeah, we tried that. Yeah. We
tried that. Right-wingers, left-wingers, people from both sides of the aisle, they can't work together. But if it works, there's a 50% chance here. If it works, so Israel is now modeling for the world a different way to do politics. And for sure, this government is modeling for Israelis that if you're a right-winger, you know what, left-wingers have some good ideas. Oh, and by the way, some Muslims, they're offering a contribution too. So in Israel, we have a government that's going against the current of history. And if it fails, things will get much worse and very much more polarized. But if it succeeds, so this is a moment pregnant. It's a very pregnant moment in Israel, because if it succeeds, Israel is a new, like in the 1950s, people came to Israel to see the miracle of socialism, the kibbutz. And ever since the 90s, people come to Israel to see the miracle of capitalism, the startup nation.
Yeah.
Will people be coming to Israel to see the miracle of politics in a polarized world of diverse government? That's the experiment happening in Israel today.
I think it's always good, especially when we're talking about dark topics and addressing existential fears. It is good, I think, to end on an uplifting note when it is natural, when it fits. And so I think the line from Micah's essay that most stood out to me, the one that I sent to a few friends, is this one. He talks about Fromm's, what's his first name? Eric Fromm's exhortation to become more loving. And he goes through that and he says, our humanity should not be measured by how much attention we attract, but by how much attention we devote to what matters. And so I'll use that as my closing summation.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, Post Office Box 360, Stamford, Connecticut 06904. Or you can call the JBS Pledge Line at 833-MY-JBS-TV. That's 833-695-2788. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. We thank you for your kind support.